Kuznetsov angles the puck into the Penguin zone, and he chases on, and Dumoulin wins the battle, but he couldn't get it out. At the right point, held in. It's towards the net, and it goes off a stick and off Murray and in the net. Wilson was in front. Did he touch the puck?
Yes, he did.
Tom Wilson. And I don't think that'll be a power play. Goal.
I think it's always intense when playing these guys. We don't like them, and they don't like us. And, you know, it is what it is out there. It was a hard game, and we come up short, but we had a good effort.
We don't like them, and they don't like us. Penguins, Capitals, that was last night. The Capitals coming into Pittsburgh and getting a 3-1 victory over the Penguins that clinched the Metro Division title for Washington. And the kind of a surprise this year that the Washington Capitals would win the division. They weren't expected to do that this year. I'm Dale Lolley sitting in today for Stan Savran. You're listening to ESPN 970 AM and 106.3 FM. The Pittsburgh Pirates have started their home opener over on the south side, or North Shore, I should say. They've taken a 1-0 lead on a Gregory Polanco RBI single, drove in Josh Harrison, who had walked earlier in the inning. So the Pirates up 1-0 over the Minnesota Twins. It's a kind of a chilly day here in Pittsburgh for the home opener. It was kind of a chilly night last night for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and they losing that game that really puts them in a tough spot. If you look at things, that knocks them to they're right now in the 5th playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. They've clinched a playoff spot, but they're just 2 points ahead of the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets having a game in hand, having only played 79, and those two teams play in Columbus on Thursday. So conceivably, the Penguins could drop into that 6th spot, and that would be a big problem for them if they do that, because they've just not been a very good team on the road this year. Really, the only team, if you look at the playoff standings as they stand right now, they could be the only team in the Eastern Conference that enters the playoffs with a losing record. Right now, the Florida Panthers, who are in 9th spot right now in the East, sitting there with a 16-19-5 record on the road this year. The Penguins sit at 16-20-4. Everybody else has a winning record on the road in the Eastern Conference who is going to be in these playoffs. We're going to talk about that now with Chris Bradford of DKPittsburghSports.com. Chris, you were at that game last night against the Washington Capitals, and is there some cause for concern with the Penguins?
No, I think that the Penguins were actually pretty pleased, I think, overall with their effort. I think it was just a matter of a lack of execution. I mean, I think they had 5 power play chances, and you're not going to see that every day, but I think, they thought they had some looks at it, and if they convert, 1 or 2 of those, they felt it could have been a different game. I wasn't that high on their performance. I thought it was okay, but I thought it was a very tight game. I thought it was, the kind of game I think the Penguins can expect to see in the playoffs.
That's what I was going to say. Was that kind of a playoff type game last night? I think both teams know they're in the postseason. For Washington, that was kind of a big deal because it gave them a chance to win the division. Again, nobody thought that they were going to do that when the season started.
No, the Capitals really have been a remarkable team this season. Obviously they've had a lot of success in the past. They've won President's trophies, haven't had much to show for it, and they've had a good bit of turnover last summer. Lost some veteran depth, but the Capitals, Alex Ovechkin, Nick Backstrom, those guys, they just keep coming. I mean, it remains to be seen if they'll actually have success in the playoffs, but I think they certainly can be proud of what they've achieved this year. And I think last night's game was a pretty good test for the Penguins, and so was the game later last week against New Jersey. I thought that was a really good test for the Penguins. They really kind of get their feet wet to get a feel of what the playoffs are going to be like for them again this year.
How big is this game on Thursday against Columbus? Does home ice in the first round matter to the Penguins?
They say it doesn't. They're confident in winning wherever. That's Mike Sullivan's mantra the past few days has been, hey, we're comfortable wherever we can win, wherever we've done it in the past. And they have. I mean, give them the credit. They've won 2 Stanley Cups, clinching games on the road. But I think that the record shows as a fact that they're a much better team on home ice. And for whatever reason, they haven't been as good on the road. So this game Thursday, potentially could determine whether they're going to have home ice in the first round. And, I think obviously the Penguins would like to be at PPG Paints Arena.
This the way the NHL does its playoff system is just drives me nuts. And being
you're not alone.
Yeah, I don't pretend to be a great hockey fan or anything like that. But I look at the way they do their playoffs is just absolutely the dumbest thing in all of sports. That being said, this Eastern Conference this year, to me, looks like it's deeper than it's been in the previous 2 years, and that may be the biggest issue that the Penguins have with getting back to and winning a third cup.
It really is. The Atlantic Division has really come on strong here lately. Obviously, Tampa Bay's kind of led wire to wire. Now Boston's right up there with them, and I think Boston's kind of emerged as the team to beat. And Toronto is right there as a young and up-and-coming team that's probably looking to get to at least the conference final. And then, obviously in the Metro Division, it's been razor-thin margin all year. So there's no great favorite. Possibly Boston would be that team, but it's going to be pretty crazy. And given the way the playoff format works, a team like Boston or Tampa Bay could go out in the first round conceivably, and same with Washington and Pittsburgh on the Metro side of things.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting playoffs to be sure. And one thing I like to look at, and I mentioned this, I had Dejan Kovacevic on earlier, is goal differential. And when I look at those three teams from the Atlantic, Boston at plus 60, Tampa Bay at plus 55, and Toronto, surprisingly, at plus 41. And then you look at Washington and Pittsburgh, they're both plus 17, with Columbus next at plus 14. So does that mean that the Atlantic's been that much better this year?
No, I really think it's just Boston really came on late. That was a team I don't think too many people saw being where they are right now. It looked like the window had closed on them. They have a lot of rookie players who've really kind of stepped up and helped them. Tampa Bay for most of the season has been, the kind of the gold standard in the Eastern Conference. But looking at the Metro side of things, I mean, the Penguins, they were a minus team up until I'm going to say middle of February before they ever got into the black. And so they had a few games that skewed that. Obviously, I think there was a 10-1 game in Chicago very early in the season. They got blown out by a few times, so it did kind of skew their number a little bit. But they're finally up on the black side of things, and I think the division in the Metro has just been so tight. The parity is pretty greater than it's ever been.
Chris, let's change things up and talk about the Western Conference just a little bit here. Only 3 teams have clinched so far, which is kind of remarkable in itself. The Vegas Golden Knights, are they the best story in hockey this year?
Oh, they might be the best story in sports. I mean, that's really a remarkable thing with what they've done there as an expansion team. I think I wrote them off probably in November thinking, okay, they had a nice start, but they were going to tail off, and it really hasn't happened. I mean, they've had a few bumps on the road, but they're still right there among the top teams in the conference. Gerard Gallant definitely gets the Coach of the Year, and George McPhee is the Executive of the Year. And don't underestimate the work that Marc-Andre Fleury has done there. I mean, he was a guy who was 33, 34 years old. A lot of people thought he was at getting towards the end of his career, was made available in expansion draft, and he's really really carried that team, I think, to this point. It's going to be very interesting to see what they do in the postseason.
If they got to the finals and played the Penguins, would there be people torn in Pittsburgh over who to root for in that?
No, but I think if the Knights won, I think they'd get a nice hearty ovation, but certainly would make a great road trip.
But of course, they're in the second spot in the West right now. The Nashville Predators sitting atop with 113 points with 3 games left to play. Again, 51, 17, and 11. They've been very good. They don't have, again, Boston has the best goal differential in the league at plus 60. Who's the favorite right now?
From the West, definitely Nashville. I mean, that's a team that obviously had got a lot of experience, postseason experience last year, reaching the final. Gave the Penguins a really good series. I mean, and they're back again this year. Great goaltending, Pekka Rinne. Obviously, a guy Penguins fans became familiar with last spring. He's been outstanding. He's probably the Vezina winner this year. Very well-coached team, very strong defense core. They've got 3 or 4 defensemen that could be number one on almost any team. So
certainly on the Penguins. Well, maybe not on the. I mean, in terms of straight defensemen, maybe on the Penguins.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see, if the Predators were kind of a one-off. It doesn't appear that way. They looks like they're ready to maybe take that next step and maybe challenge again for a second season. It's been a while since a team has repeated in the Western Conference. I think it was Detroit when they played the Penguins a decade ago that got there in back-to-back years. So they're definitely a team to keep an eye on.
Now, it's hard to believe, but the playoffs are just a couple of weeks away, and they'll go into June. It's almost like a completely second season to everything else. Can the Penguins flip that switch? I mean, and they've done it in the second half of the season. I mean, basically since the start of January, since the start of the new year, they've been a much different team than they were in the first half of the season. Can you see this team ratcheting things up even further going into the postseason?
You know, it's funny you say that. I'm looking out the window and I see snow, so it feels like winter to me. So it's kind of getting used to the playoffs coming up here soon. Seems a little strange, but I think the Penguins can find another gear. I think they've shown that, you know, in the past few weeks, depending on their opponent, that they're able to elevate their game. And they certainly have players who are capable of doing that, guys like Crosby and Malkin, obviously. But the guy to really look for, and he's not in the lineup now, is Derek Brassard. He's been out the past few games with a lower body injury, a groin injury. He's a guy who's earned a reputation as being, you know, big game brass. So this will be the first time that the Penguins will get to see him in a big game situation. I look for him to be, you know, possibly a deciding factor, because that's one of the reasons they got him, is because of his playoff experience and the depth he provides for the Penguins down the middle. That could be a matchup problem for any team that they will face.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see, because I don't want to call him a disappointment since they got him at the trade deadline, but he certainly hasn't. I mean, he's done what he's done throughout his career, basically.
Right.
But he's been a playoff performer. He's performed at the biggest stages.
Yeah, and that's, you know, again, one of the reasons they got him. But the flip side is, you know, obviously you lose a guy like Ryan Reeves, and you saw the impact that not having him in the lineup last night when you saw some of the shenanigans that were going on late in the game against the Capitals, and then of course you lose Ian Cole, and we've seen over the last few weeks of what his loss or his absence has meant to the penalty kill. That was a group that had been as high as the 5th ranked, and now they're down to, I believe, 19th. The penalty kill, I think, is the one area where the Penguins should have some concern in the playoffs, because it only takes one chance on a power play or another team's power play to really potentially decide a game and possibly a series.
Are we going to see teams boning up on their Russian to yell things at Malkin in the playoffs?
That was a pretty comical set. I've never heard of that one. It's not every day you see, a 50-year-old assistant coach get ejected, and then a guy complaining about someone yelling at him in Russian. So that was a very odd scene, but I guess kind of typical of what you see in these late season games when you have a potential playoff matchup.
It's kind of like the scene from Fish Called Wanda, where the Kevin Kline's character just starts saying Russian words, Glasnost, and that kind of stuff. It turns Jamie Lee Curtis on. That didn't happen with Malkin. He went a different direction with that, but should be interesting to see with the Penguins coming up. What do you got coming up on DK Pittsburgh Sports, Chris?
We got a couple things coming. We got obviously the big game against Columbus. We're going to obviously bone up on that game, because that's, again, we mentioned earlier about the importance of that game. That's for the Penguins to not have home ice advantage or potentially fall into third place and possibly lower would be pretty big, because the Penguins have won the Stanley Cup each of the last 2 years, but they've done it by being the second place team in the Metropolitan Division, and obviously the Penguins would like to retain that.
Okay, he is Chris Bradford. We appreciate you coming on, Chris, and you can read him at dkpittsburghsports.com.